It's my pleasure and distinct honor to be introducing the first session with President Joseph Aoun and his very special guest, Dave Rue. I'm actually truly humbled having to introduce them, so I will read from notes. Normally I don't, but our president has done so much that if I didn't select, I'd spend the whole hour just introducing him. For sure, our president needs no introduction, and his academic and leadership achievements are beyond recounting. He's a well-known higher education thought leader and renowned scholar in linguistics, having come out of MIT and done some amazing work. He is the 7th president at Northeastern, where his leadership for the past 15 years has been nothing short of transformational in growth, quality, academic leadership, whatever measure you want to throw at it. It's really been transformational. It has taken Northeastern to unprecedented heights. Perhaps most worthy of mention to me, personally, I guess, is his book, Robot Proof, Higher Education in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. If you care about AI, if you care about higher ed, and you haven't read the book, I actually highly recommend it. The president there challenges essentially higher ed to maintain relevance in this new digital world where a lot of things are getting automated. President Aoun is recipient of many honors, huge list. But I would mention a special one, the Chevalier de la Légion d'honneur, which is the highest honor bestowed by the President of the French Republic on folks. President Aoun is very visible and accessible presence on campus. That's the other unusual thing about him. Always surprising the students and always being plugged in on campus life. We are fortunate that President Aoun has been thinking about AI and why we need to figure out how higher ed can play a much more strategic and relevant role in the training, practice, and research of the AI of the future. Now, I'm going to shift gears and introduce Dave Rue. Another introduction that could take hours, but I'm trying to compress it as much as possible and at least personalize it. Dave Rue is our guest of honor and one of the biggest supporters of the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern University through the Rue Institute, which we'll talk about in a second. Right out of Harvard Business School, Dave co-founded a company, which he later sold to Lotus, played a big role at Oracle, eventually becoming CEO of Liberate Technologies. And then he made a surprising move. He co-founded this fund called Silver Lake. And this is where I first heard about Dave on a personal basis. And the thesis was, at the time, hey, this internet thing, it's being underestimated by the market. And boy, were they right. When they realized this and formed the fund, the biggest companies you can think of who are players on the internet are essentially graduates or investees from Silver Lake, including Skype, Ameritrade, GoDaddy, Alibaba, and the list goes on and on and on. In my life, at least, Silver Lake is a legend in the space of kind of funding internet companies. Of course, I never dreamed how big a part Dave Rue was going to play in my future at Northeastern University. Dave and Barbara Rue, who's also with us today, enabled the formation of the Rue Institute in Portland as an economic and educational game changer through a grant of $100 million. We owe a huge debt to the support of the Rue Institute, which also enabled the subsequent creation of the Institute for Experiential AI that is co-funded by the central funds at the university through the provost office and, of course, the Rue Institute. So I am personally grateful, and on behalf of myself and the team, I really want to thank both of these men for placing their trust in me and the team at the Institute to build what we certainly are aiming to make the leading research institute in experiential AI. More on that later. Now I'd like to formally welcome our president and Dave Rue to the stage, where, yeah, please. And we had originally planned on keynotes, but our president, of course, said, no, let's do a fireside chat. And I thought, that what a wonderful idea.
Good morning, everyone. And Barb, good morning. So let me recognize also Barb Rue and Barb and Dave Rue. I'm going to start by asking Dave the first question, and that's an easy one, but it's an exciting answer that you're going to hear. Why did you think of AI when you started dreaming about the Rue Institute?
Well, Barb and I are have the view that American education is fundamentally underinvested in the future of technology, and that the most important foundation technology is AI today, because it provides a foundation for both digital engineering and the next generation of life science, which is increasingly computational. That's kind of part one. Part two is that we as a society are over-concentrated in a few large cities. And consequently, we have this very funny situation where talent and ambition are very broadly distributed in the country, but opportunity is highly concentrated in really just 6 or 8 major urban centers. And so what we wanted to demonstrate is that if you make a major investment in next generation training for people to really kind of take those abilities and turn it into useful talent, then companies, which are increasingly highly distributed in how they operate, can go anywhere for that talent. And so if you create that next generation of talent, it will be wonderful for the people, wonderful for the learners, fantastic for the companies, and great for the communities where they live.
You know, for Northeastern, when Barb and Dave approached us, you know, we looked at it as a challenge, as an opportunity, because we are in many primary cities, and we have never been in a non-primary city. And the idea was, do we want to be part of that? Do we want to work with Barb and Dave and launch something? But if we started thinking about it from the following perspective. If we launch something there, we have to do it based on impact. We have to have an impact. And how do you have an impact? That's easier said than done. It led us to rethink together with Barb and Dave the whole model in higher education. Because in higher education, what we essentially do, we build them, we build the curricula, we build the issues, we build the research, and then we expect the real world to come to us. Whereas we changed the equation here, and we said, let's start with the real world, let's start with the enterprises, let's start with the companies, and then let them be at the table, telling us what their talent needs are, and where enterprise needs are, and then we are going to shape a journey together. So that was a departure. Now, this is relevant because the experiential AI model is essentially based on that. Because you know, and you're going to hear more from my colleagues and from the speakers today, that AI is central. You are also going to hear that every university has AI. But we are starting with the partners. We are shaping the journey together. And that's the beauty of the Rue model and the Rue vision. And that's the beauty of the experiential AI model. let me go back to Dave. And Dave, it's you have something in your pocket that you showed us. I'm eager to hear more about it.
All salespeople have a prop. This is a chip. Hasn't been released yet, but will shortly. Made by a company, new company called Terray, T-E-R-R-A-Y. As you can see, it's, you know, normal chip-looking thing. And this is the synthesis of very advanced chip making and modern computational life sciences. And what it has on the chip are 30 million small molecule compounds with a full description of the morphology, toxicology, all of the physical properties, all of the chemical properties of these little DNA strands. And what it does, it's built and designed to help people who are doing drug discovery very quickly, and of course, hugely more efficiently, screen for molecules that might be great for a particular task. And it very much, it sort of inverts the notion, which is instead of having a molecule, you know, instead of having something that you want to solve, looking for a molecule, testing it, iterating, testing, iterating, hoping it works, and then 7 or 10 years later, maybe you have something. This flips it on its head, where you say, I think that these kind of things might solve this kind of problem, and then you can screen 30 million different options in less than 5 minutes to look at it. And it boils down super quickly the search process.
So why did you bring it today? What's the point of having that? What are you trying to illustrate for us?
What I want to do is bring it and just say that once a problem becomes computational, AI, we often talk about AI algorithmically, because it's the great conceit of computer science that the engineers writing the algorithms, that's the magic. That's the poetry in the, you know, in the system. But in fact, it's really all about the data. And that the great, whether or not we think AI is a good idea or not, the point is that it is the only way. It is an absolute, complete necessity, because you can't, doesn't matter how smart you are, know and understand, compare in real time 30 million, the properties, the n-dimensional properties of 30 million compounds. It's beyond what is possible for the smartest human to do, right? Why Garry Kasparov now loses at chess to a computer. And it's why, in the future, the smartest biochemist is going to lose to chips and, you know, AI-based systems like this around drug discovery. So the point I'm making is that what happens is when you get these really, really large data sets, I mean, once we sequenced the genome, and it became A's and C's and G's and T's, right? And we have a computational basis for biology, then it looks just like 1960 and computing, right? So the next 50 years in life science is going to be all about, it is going to be a recapitulation of what we have just lived through over the last 5 or 6 decades around information technology will happen here. So that's really the base point.
Let me.
Can I make one other? Can I just make
absolutely.
one other point?
Absolutely. We have the whole day.
For the business people in the crowd, when we were thinking about where we might make this sort of overtly entrepreneurial investment, we were looking for social entrepreneurs, people who were willing to think differently about what they were doing. And we landed here at Northeastern after speaking with 14 different institutions around the country. And frankly, the competition was not close.
That's news to me. I didn't know that. Barb, you didn't say that. Okay.
And part of what, with my kind of business hat on, I would say, is that it was incredibly refreshing, A, that we're willing to try anything new, right? 'Cause that's not been a feature of American higher education generally. But that part of the insight here at Northeastern, which I think flows from the university's long history with co-ops, 3,000 different business partnerships, is the insight that the customer in this picture is not the student. It's not the learner. It's the person who hires the learner. It's the corporation. That's the customer. The learners are the product. And it's very much like a media model, right, where the subscriber to your magazine or to your streaming service is not the customer. The advertisers are the customers, and the subscribers, right, are the product. And kind of understanding that flip means that you think completely differently about making the best product possible, right? So it's not, these people aren't showing up and, they're not here in service of the faculty. The faculty is there to make them as good as they can be, which means not just teaching them the curriculum that you think that's important, but most importantly, the curriculum that the ultimate customer thinks is important. And so having that partnership where the customer, those corporations, those business partners, by the way, also government partners and nonprofits, right? Not just for-profit corporations, tell us what you need 2 and 3 years from now, and we'll help you build that by teaching and providing real-world experiences for those learners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me build on various aspects of what you said, Dave. Yeah, when you mentioned, you brought this chip and you showed it to us, higher education looks at it, thank you, I'll keep it. Higher education looks at it with trepidation. And I'm talking here about various conversations and surveys with other presidents. And why? Because we are generating educating PhD students in AI. And 60% of the PhD students are going to industry. And my colleagues are looking at it and saying, my God, this is a disaster for us. We don't look at it this way. Going back to what Dave said, we look at it as an opportunity. Why is it an opportunity? Because it is the case that industry now is generating research that is equal and in some domains superior to what's happening in higher education. So education needs industry in the same way that industry needs education. So let's start with this. And therefore, if you start closing yourself and having defense mechanisms and with respect to this phenomenon, you are going to lose. And the beauty of experiential AI, the Experiential AI Institute, and the whole RU model is precisely to say, no, we are going to do it together. But if you say, well, that's easy, do it. But it's going to require a change in our culture in higher education. Because, first of all, we have to be humble. And, in academia, we're not humble. We have to listen. We have to learn to listen. The second thing is also we have to learn to change our practices. If you are a person who is called to government, for instance, and you are in academia, in many universities, you can spend 2 years at most. After 2 years, you have to give up your job and go back to academia. We are saying no. We are saying, in fact, if you have an offer from an industry, let's say, and you want to spend time there, do it jointly with us. So you can spend 50% of your time there, 50% here. But also the research that we will be doing, and we are doing now, has to also be modified in the following way. You know, historically in academia, you look at it and you say, look, I am interested in the fundamental research. I dabble a little bit with the applied part, the translational part, but I never go and scale it, or I never go and look at a real-world situation. But when you start working with the partners, you have to take into account those aspects. And traditionally, higher education said, look, there is a hierarchy between fundamental and applied research, because fundamental is higher and applied is a second, at the second stage, way lower. Whereas in fact, what we are learning through these partnerships is that the applied part, when you start applying things, you have to rethink your fundamental premises. So that's the beauty of, you know, that's a plug for the Experiential AI Institute, because it's exactly what the Institute is doing. And that's why we're exciting. And moreover, and that's why the Institute is housed at the Roux Institute, because the Roux Institute has this model of starting with the real world. Dave said, you know, we look at the customers as being the enterprises we work with. Let me mention there is another dimension that's important to us, is that we want to work with the enterprises and we want to foster a system, an ecosystem of entrepreneurship that will create and launch the next companies that will employ our students, and the students themselves become entrepreneurs. And that's what's happening at the Roux Institute in a beautiful way. Let me go back to you, Dave. And when you look at what, you know, you already told us what's happening in with respect to AI becoming ubiquitous, becoming an enabling technology. What do you think are the challenges that AI and the adoption of AI will be in society? What are the challenges that we'll be facing in society with respect to the adoption of AI?
Well, there are a few obvious ones. The first is not nearly enough people who actually understand how it works. And that right now, I mean, the synonym for AI, I would say, is computer science that no one understands. In other words, it's suitably advanced that even people who have a relatively high familiarity with basic computer science just say, oh, that's the, you know, that's the world just over the horizon. I know it's important, but I actually don't understand anything about what's going on there. And so it's sort of an object of religion. So we need a lot more people, and part of the partnership, our partnership with Northeastern, is the idea of saying, look, instead of churning out, you know, a few dozen or a couple of hundred PhDs a year, wouldn't it be great if we produced thousands of people with master's degrees capable of participating in this generational shift around computing power and influence, right? And those, we're off by at least one and probably 2 to 3 orders of magnitude in terms of the numbers of people that we need in government, in industry, and in nonprofits. So that's one. Second thing is that we need the data. I touched on it earlier, right? Which is that an algorithm without data is of no use whatsoever, right? It's like an empty taxi. It doesn't do anything. And so the reason that the partnerships with the companies and governments are so important is that testing the algorithm on, you know, a small data set is almost irrelevant. It almost doesn't work, right? You need very, very, very large data sets. And so the best data sets actually are not in academia. right? It's actually, it is, unlike many past technologies, not possible to do the most cutting-edge research by yourself in an isolated academic setting. And then the third part, and this really goes right to the heart of what experiential AI is about, is that you need people in the loop at design time, at testing time, and at governance and oversight time, right? Right across the full value chain, from how you design to what's in the data. Because remember, these are very, very large data sets, so you have to kind of interrogate them, very thoughtfully to understand what's in there, because it's the data. It's almost like a binary weapon, right? The data, these very, very large data sets that are hard to understand, with the algorithms, and when they're combined. So you need to know how the algorithms are designed, you need to know what's in the data set, and how those two things interact to be sure that you are ethically managing these very large data sets. I mean, think about the medical implications, think about all of the decision-making that might depend on whether you get into school or not, or whether you get a job or not. You want to be confident that works there. So I think those are the three big things.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a point that actually it's music to Osama's ears, because he said, don't forget to mention human in the loop when you talk about the experiential AI and what makes it different from other institutes. And it's true. And once again, if you take it at a more general level, what we are seeing is what we call the humanization of AI. AI started as something, let's call it a technology, as a domain, as a field that is an enabling technology that now is impacting, as Dave said, every industry, research, what we do. At the same time, we are seeing that the human dimension is becoming an important dimension.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people imagine that AI is really AI, and by that I mean that in addition to being artificial, it's autonomous and anonymous. And nothing could be further from the truth, or more dangerous. And so kind of having a leash on the thing is critical. In the same way that you wouldn't put your 16-year-old on a Ferrari. We're building Ferraris, super cheap for people to use in these applications. You just need to think about who's driving.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, incidentally, this example of the 16-year-old not driving a Ferrari, we have students who build their own Ferraris and they're driving them, and they are 18. So, and they started doing that before coming here. But this issue of humanization is important for society. You mentioned, Dave, you mentioned the notion of privacy. We talk about ethics, we talk about discrimination. That's something that is now central to everything we do. We were talking with Dr. Snyder, and she was mentioning the same thing here. So we are going to have to integrate that. And once again, if you look at it from the perspective of higher education is changing the way it's looking at AI, led by our colleagues here, in the sense that you cannot do AI unless you bring the other disciplines, and unless you bring the the human dimensions, unless you bring you mentioned the privacy issues, the discriminations, etc. What does it mean? It means that, in fact, the notion of schools, departments, etc., is being questioned. Questioned in the sense that you cannot be self-sufficient. In the same way that in the real world, when you look at a problem, you are going to bring the various expertise to play there. From the beginning, you have to do it here. And that's the beauty of the institute, the center that Osama is leading. And Dave, let me turn to you, because we are, I think our time is up. Why don't you close with something that you want to share with all of us?
Well, I would just say that it's important to think about AI not as an island onto itself, in which case it'll just be a wasted opportunity, but rather all of the most interesting things are happening at the kind of interstices, the interface between AI and other subject matter, other industries, right? So it's AI in healthcare, it's AI in drug discovery, it's AI in automotive, it's AI in consumer electronics, it's AI, AI in industrial automation. That's where all the interesting work is going on. And so we were just chatting out in the anteroom beforehand, having a coffee, and I said, look, what that means is that in the future, everyone needs to know at least two things, right? You need to know about AI, and you need to have some domain expertise, right? And those two things together is where the magic happens. And it's why I think the Northeastern approach to artificial intelligence, not as this sort of, sacred mountaintop, but as a practical, highly catalytic foundation technology is so crucial, because it's attracting the kind of partners and collaborators that will make the technology most useful, because in the end, that's what matters.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to hear from colleagues today who are going to talk about the talent they need and the research issues that they are facing. And what's interesting is that we are changing, and we have changed the whole approach to our curricula, even precisely to fit with what Dave was talking about. We want every student coming out of Northeastern to have what we call humanics. And humanics is essentially the integration of three literacies: a tech literacy, understanding machines; data or AI literacy, understanding the products of these machines and how they impact us; and the human literacy. This is what we humans can do that machines cannot duplicate easily: ability to be innovative, creative, ethical, etc., and culturally agile. So what is the conclusion? The conclusion is that AI is not only impacting you in your businesses, but also leading us to rethink our operations and also our mission. And that's the exciting part. That's why we need this dialogue with you, to understand not only your needs, but also to understand how we are going to redefine ourselves. Thank you for being here today, and thank you, Dave. Thank you.